Hello and welcome to the League Presents, a show by the League of Women Voters of Newton, where we will talk about topical issues important to our community. My name is Marcia Johnson, and I am a League of Women Voters of Newton member. This program is the third of a three-part series of Don't Just Stand There, Run. Our last program focused on the campaign, which for some may already have begun. Today we will be focusing on the work of a city councilor and school committee member. For this conversation, I am joined by former city councilor Alicia Bowman and former school committee member Kathy Shields. Both are members of the League of Women Voters of Newton's Board of Directors. So let's get started. So Kathy, let's start with you. On an average week, how much time did you spend doing school committee work?
So I guess it's an average between 7 and 15 hours a week. It certainly varied at other times of year or when other sort of projects were particularly busy, but that's a pretty good on average
And that
estimate.
included the school committee meeting that you...
It did,
Okay.
yeah. So the school committee itself meets every other Monday, more or less. And those meetings are generally about 2.5 to 3 hours.
Okay. And Alicia?
I spend a little more time. Some of it is who I am as a person, but I'd say I easily spend 25 hours a week, sometimes as much as 40 hours a week. We have a few more meetings, but there's just the breadth of the topics that we're addressing and, in my need to stay connected on many of these issues, attending things like the Commission on Disability, I included as part of my responsibility, attending webinars and meetings with topic experts to learn more about the types of decisions we were making so that I could be up on the latest trends, I think was just part of it. And so, not to mention constituent services and,
Right.
and responding to people's issues. Takes a lot of time.
How many meetings, how many hours of meetings, which is a pretty fixed number, right? for the
Oh,
most part?
well, it depends. I was on land use, which would meet 3 times a month in the busy season, and those meetings could be 2 hours. They could be 4 or 5 hours, depending. That's 3 times a month, and then PS&T another couple hours a month, and then city council meetings. So some could be an hour, and some could be 3 or 4 hours, depending on.
Okay.
So it really just varied.
Yeah, it averages out about 25 hours a week, maybe, something like that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. In normal times, Alicia, what were the 3 most common issues that you addressed in your work?
Well, a good deal of my time was taken up with land use issues, just being on that committee, because.
Can you just a little bit on
So
land use?
land use is a special permit. So this is, it's very difficult to write the codes of what can be built in Newton in a perfect way that's fair, because not all properties are the same.
Right.
And there are different needs. So, this really takes a lot of judgment as to what's in both your quasi-judicial role. So you're not representing the citizen, the residents, or the city, or the property owners. You're really more judicial. You're looking at all 3 and what's the best for in all of those situations. So it can be quite complicated, and those
Yes,
take
it
some
can be.
time, and understanding, going out and seeing the property for yourself sometimes helps. I have been a transportation advocate for many years, so I was really passionate about making our city more walkable and bikeable, and public transportation working better, and street design being safer. So I spent a lot of time paying attention to what was happening on those projects and trying to weigh in on that.
And wouldn't that have a fair amount of constituent emotion and thoughts?
Oh yes, everybody's a traffic engineer. even though people go to school for 6 to 8 years to learn to be a traffic engineer, everybody's a traffic engineer.
Okay, so it's not that simple.
It's not simple,
Right.
So a lot of time on that. And then I think the third most common is just people having an issue with the city service that wasn't going quite the way that they needed it to go.
Nice phraseology.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Kathy?
So in a typical school year, I think the issues that come up again and again for school committee members are budget and implications of budget decisions. So you both do the budget cycle in the spring, where you set the budget for the year, but throughout the year you're constantly revisiting the budget and there are changes to the budget. You have to move money around sometimes. So that becomes a recurring issue throughout the year. You're also in the fall doing budget guidelines. So
It's a budget guideline.
so it's the school committee sort of, it's a more of a policy statement. Since
Okay.
a budget is a statement really about values, it is the values piece of the budget that the school committee gives to the superintendent as guidance for formulating the budget
Okay,
that
that's
he
good
or
to
she
know.
would propose. So there's that sort of piece of things. Collective bargaining is a perennial issue. It's something I was pretty involved in during my time there. The school committee is the party responsible for bargaining with our 3 unions. And even in addition to the actual bargaining over contracts, even when contracts are in place, there are sort of ordinary things that happen in relationship to employee issues. Like we hear grievances at multiple levels, and we're involved in sort of policies relating to employment issues. And then I'd say the third issue that we all spend a lot of time with is school buildings and facilities. I mean, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, we've been engaged in a lot of actual school building projects, and each of those has its own school building committee. So every school committee member.
What's a school building committee?
So every school building member has served on one or more of these. It's a group of people established for a building project.
So is it school committee members or?
It's a wider group, so there are always school committee members, or a member or members on each school building committee. There are also staff from the building, from the school.
Okay.
There are community members. There's almost always a city council member, members of the city's Department of Public Works, like Josh Morse and his team. It also has the professional architects. I don't know that they're technically members, but there's always an architect and an owner's project manager, and those folks who come and present to and guide the work of the school building committee. And that body's work is very heavily influenced by the Mass School Building Authority's process that has to be followed for MSBA projects, but it's also the process we follow for non-MSBA projects too. And there's a very set of steps that you go through in looking at a building project, all the way from where is the building going to be placed up through the final design and construction.
And there has been a lot of.
There has been a lot of that.
Starting with Newton North.
Yeah,
Yes.
and interestingly, those projects still have to be voted on by the city council, because city council does vote on all public buildings.
Right.
So,
Especially, and the city council has an important appropriations
yes.
aspect to these
Yes, exactly.
projects as well.
Okay, so what were the parts of your job that you liked or enjoyed the most and the least? So, Alicia?
The parts that I liked the most, I would say dealing with the constituents. You know, I did, even when I had to tell them something that they didn't particularly want to hear, but me trying to just, you know, it's an opportunity to reach out to people and try to do your best to help them understand why what they want is not possible, or their position. I mean, we went through the whole thing with the gun store that was attempting to open
right.
on Washington Street, and keep getting a process to inform. And we had 700 people reach out to us. I can proudly say I emailed back every single person who emailed me and let them know, and then had a process to update them on what was happening in the city council. And that feels good when you're like, I'm able to
absolutely.
give you the information that you need, explain to you why we can't just ban gun stores, but what is the process that we're going through and why it makes sense. The part I like the least, I think sometimes listening to public comment on land use meetings.
Why is that?
Because people frequently came with a mindset that was not very neighborly. I'd just start by saying that. I mean, people coming up objecting to somebody adding a mudroom, or in one case we had a neighbor objecting to an ADU being developed for their
ADU?
An accessory dwelling unit. So an additional add-on to someone's house to accommodate their grown child who had become a quadriplegic.
Oh, wow.
And the neighbor objected, and it's hard to listen to that.
Yeah,
Or
that
people who don't want something because they're afraid there'll be too many kids in the school, or You know, they think Newton's too crowded. That it's hard to hear some of that
Yeah.
sometimes because
they're-
you not only feel like that's not a good vision for Newton and certainly vision, but you also recognize the implication of to our budget and everything else of us limiting our growth potential. And
Well, but they have their feelings too. So
right,
that
no, you have to hear it, but
yeah,
it's
absolutely. No, but
yeah.
I understand.
But
yeah.
understanding that maybe they don't, the people that you hear a lot of, you know, especially if you understand the research that you know, that it's not always representative of who's there and who's speaking and what they're saying isn't necessarily representative of the community in general. So it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, it is hard because they, as I said, they have their opinions. And
Right.
they need the opportunity.
Yeah.
And Kathy, what do you like the most and the least about being a school committee member?
So that piece is easy, and it was interacting with students. So we both had student members on our school committee, and just working with them and getting to know them over the years. I feel like in some of my earlier days on the school committee, the students were always at our meetings in person, and so you really got to know the students. A lot of them
You know,
stayed.
were they juniors, seniors, sophomores?
So it was a good mix. I mean, not freshmen usually, but it was not uncommon that a student school committee member would join as a sophomore and stay for all 3 years. So I actually got to know some of them very well, and it was really wonderful to sort of develop a relationship with them. They were all incredibly impressive students and young people. And in addition to the student school committee members, we would often do things where we were interacting with students in their capacity as sort of presenting to us about a program or working on a committee, or I used to be the school committee representative to the Newton Youth Commission. And so just working with the students in all capacities was really fun.
Sounds like
and
fun.
really
You can see you
uplifting
enjoyed
too.
it.
I really liked that part. In terms of my least favorite, not quite the same, but a couple of times throughout my years on the school committee, we had public hearings on issues that were fairly divisive. So in my first term, there was a public hearing where there was a large group of people, largely from outside of Newton, but not exclusively, challenging the Middle East curriculum.
Yes, I remember that.
And that was very difficult. Divisive, I thought not good overall for sort of morale, shall we say. And then later in my tenure, in my last term, there was a similar set of, not the same issues, but sort of similar emotion, and ultimately had a public hearing on issues that sort of related to some of the DEI changes that Newton had made. And I suppose there was sort of both the good and the bad of it. It was, a lot of people came out and spoke up for the school system, but a lot of people expressed their displeasure. And so I think there were a lot of strong feelings on both sides. And I don't know that was my favorite part of being a school committee member.
That's hard to hear, but again, we have free speech, so it's
We
an
certainly
important
do.
aspect of
We do.
your work as, community representatives. What was a part of your job that you did not anticipate before you actually got there? Kathy?
Well, that's easy. The pandemic. It never occurred to me that I would be part of helping to reinvent education over the course of a summer. I don't think anyone could have anticipated something like that. I think when our schools closed in March of, I guess it was 2020, and that was immensely traumatic for families and for students and for teachers and for our staff, and trying to figure out, I mean, I know that the solution for that last couple of months of that school year was far from ideal. And then over the course of the summer, trying to figure out how we could best reopen buildings. That was a really challenging summer. I don't think anybody ever expected having to do that kind of work. And in retrospect, that was by far the hardest thing
I would think so.
I did as a school committee member.
I don't think that there was anything that much surprised me. I'd been an advocate in Newton for more than 20 years and spent lots of time working on different committees, very integral to city council. So there wasn't much that surprised me, but I was, as it related to the pandemic, I certainly didn't anticipate that happening. And I tell the story about our first, chairs meeting for the city council. And one of the suggestions I had was, could we start broadcasting all of our meetings and committee meetings so people could participate from home, at least watch, if not be able to testify, because it's very difficult to come in and, that thought of like, how do we get more voices in the room so that it feels more representative when we do have public comment. And everyone thought I was crazy. Who's going to watch city council meetings? And did we not have suddenly, March comes and David Olson, the former clerk, figures out how we're all going to get on Zoom. We all learned how to get on Zoom, some of us faster than others.
And we still have trouble.
We still have some city council.
You're on mute. It's the phrase of the decade.
Exactly. But, suddenly we had, 100, 150 people tuned in to watch and see what we were doing. So I think it's a positive thing that came out. But I certainly never anticipated one of my key goals getting done so quickly. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the one really good thing that came out of the COVID. I'm sure there are others, but having Zoom, and because more people just in general now can participate, which is good.
I think outdoor dining was another
Outdoor
great thing
dining,
came
yes.
from COVID.
Yeah.
I loved that was another thing I wanted, outdoor dining. Yes.
There are standard parts of a job as a counselor and a school committee member, but then each member, depending on who they are and what they're interested in, may take on a unique role. So what unique role did you take on while you're school committee? And then we'll turn it over to you, Alicia.
So I worked with our general counsel to keep our policies and procedures guide updated. So it was a project that one of the former school committee members, Margaret Albright, had started a couple of years before I joined the school committee. And then once I joined, I started working with her and our general counsel. And then when she retired from the school committee, I sort of took over. Our policies and procedures manual is quite hefty. It governs all kinds of facets, both of the operations of the school committee itself and of the school department as a whole.
Okay.
It covers things like board governance on the school committee side, but it also details our fiscal management, our personnel management, rules relating to student behavior and conduct, and rules relating to the interactions between the school and various community organizations. So it's a lot of work. You have to keep it, to make it meaningful, it has to be updated when the law changes, when we realize that the way we're doing things is not the way we used to do things. And there are just a number of policies that over time have to be edited, written, rewritten.
Things change.
And it was something that I really liked doing because I got to use some of it sort of played into my legal background, and I really enjoyed that work.
Great. Thank you.
So for me, I just was writing down a list of all of them, so I didn't forget about them. And this might explain why I would spend 40 hours a week. Most important thing I think that I did was I participated in all the Commission on Disability meetings until the city, they were usually on Mondays where it's city council meeting, but I'd attend at least the first 2 hours of them because I think this is a very important group that doesn't have a strong enough voice in the city, and much needs to be done around that. I was also a member of the Climate Action implementation team. I started a pollinators group to support pollinators, which we've done some really great work.
Still doing that.
And I'm still doing that. So planting pollinator gardens and promoting native plants. I attended all the fair housing meetings, which I think are, we have some friends in common on that. And I was appointed to the Affordable Housing Trust as well. So, all very important things, and all very much aligned with things that I like, that I care deeply about.
So that's good, that an opportunity for people to do something that's kind of deeper into your areas of interest. That's great. So the pandemic, as we talked about, upended many aspects of normal city and school operations. If you could please comment on the unique challenges presented by the pandemic and lessons that we should and hopefully have taken away from that experience. Kathy? Because you started out.
Sure. Well, unique challenges. I mean, I think the biggest challenge was how do we send kids to school if they have to be 6 feet apart from each other, which was at least the rule at the beginning of the fall, where we tried to send everyone back to school, and it didn't really work that well. I think the sort of more global challenge was the uncertainty and the shifting in information. We had the best information available at the moment, but it frequently changed and evolved, and having to guess at what some of the guidelines were going to be led us to put in place a structure over that summer that I think was challenging to change as people's feelings evolved throughout the course of that school year. Newton did something very unusual that I actually don't know any other school districts in Massachusetts did, which is that we had a fully distance learning academy for our elementary school students who didn't want to be in person. And we staffed it with Newton teachers, which is not how many districts gave those options
And
to
this is
students.
something that a parent and their child could opt in.
Would make the decision to opt into. A family could say, I want to send my kid to school in a hybrid fashion, where they would be in school some days and out of school others, or they could be in this fully distance sort of school for the year, run by Newton teachers, because we didn't want families opting for that option to think that they were getting something less. The consequences of that, however, were felt throughout the course of the year, because over the course of the year, I think as people got more and more comfortable, more and more kids wanted to be back in person. It's hard to be at home when you're a little kid.
Yes.
And I think, but we had nonetheless made a commitment to those families. So putting in place a structure at the beginning of the year had big impacts throughout the year. And I think if we had to do it again, I think we'd have to think more critically about the commitments we make to people, about making a decision for a school year and sort of the possibilities of changing it, because it impacted everything else we did.
Okay, great, thank you. Alicia?
So I think that you definitely had the harder end of that from the school perspective,
yes.
as opposed to the city. But I was paying attention then, participating in a lot of statewide and nationwide webinars that were talking about, we're eventually going to be opening restaurants on the street. Your community should be getting ready to do that. And I feel like that was definitely something we were too slow. We waited in Newton until the governor said it was okay to do it. And then we developed policies and procedures where I felt like that was definitely one of the things I feel like we should have been working. And some of us were trying to say that, like, can we start? We don't know when it's going to happen, but can we go ahead and put some policies and procedures in place? And it took us months, it felt like, afterwards. Where a city like Tampa, granted it's a city, but the mayor and like 5 people got together on a weekend and put together a plan, and then spent the next week going to all the restaurants in Tampa, figuring out, are you plan A, B, or C? These are our 3 plans. And then by the end of a full week, they had a plan for all the restaurants. Feel like being able to be more flexible and nimble is definitely important so being able to move faster. I think also being willing to try more things and just be more creative from that aspect. I think that's definitely key and helpful. And there were things that we did really well. So like something I participated in getting ready to go back to school in person, they were worried that more people would be driving or walking because they'd be afraid to be on the bus. So the city council granted the Department of Public Works a lot of leeway, a certain distance, I forget what it was, like maybe a half a mile from the school or maybe a quarter mile from the school, that whatever transportation thought was the right plan, they could go ahead and do it. So we got together with the school transportation people like myself, and no rights on red and more crosswalks, and it wasn't the process that it's normally been, like COVID, we're going to go ahead and put these in place. And it would have been great if we could have had some more things like that, faster on the restaurants, faster on, putting in bike lanes, because we certainly had a lot more first responders and doctors and nurses biking on Beacon Street because they weren't going to get on the T to get into the hospital. So moving faster on some of those items would have been great. But
So, in listening to you, there are two parts to your job. There's stuff where you have to do analysis, and there's stuff where there's a heart piece of it. So, as you think about that, and what you said about what you joined, any advice for people who are now, we know are running, especially there's a whole group of them running for a school committee,
there are.
around the head and the heart as they look to that job, and then we'll come to you. So.
I don't know that I have any advice, just other than to sort of think about the fact that there are those two sides, and you have to be prepared in both ways. Off on the heart side, I guess, a lot of the value that you're providing as both an information resource and as a recipient of community feedback, that's all heart side stuff. But there's also a lot to read, a lot to understand, a lot to digest, and a lot of data to be able to understand so that you can feed it back to people in ways that are manageable.
Great, thank you. Alicia?
I think I can't, I think if you can't get the heart piece, you're just not going to get the heart piece. You either have it or you don't. I don't feel like everybody always does. I think the hardest thing for a lot of people to understand is the importance of understanding the biggest drivers. I mean, people talk about the school budget and now the city council budget that they're working on now. Understanding municipal finance and how the city makes money and spends money, and our lack of flexibility sometimes to meet our goals. I think many people would love to see, probably the mayor too, would love to see the schools get more funding. But there's literally not money there. So we need to do something to fix those items. So understanding what those issues are and your impact on that really is really critical.
So I'm waiting for the time, but one thing, quick message to those candidates that are running for school committee right now.
Have fun.
Have fun.
It's hard, but it's it's some of the most rewarding volunteer work I've ever done, and it is very worth it. So hang in there. The campaigning is hard. The work is good.
Great. Alicia?
Campaigning is hard. It's very hard. It's a lot of work, but city council is a lot of work. But it is important, I think, too. I was 4 years on the city council and 20 years in the city before that, and it was a good 4 years, and it was enjoyable, and I certainly learned a lot. And
Great.
I think it's great and it's important. So
Okay.
consider running if you haven't stepped up yet.
And I
It's
think
not too late.
I'm reading in, I think it was Big City, there are openings. There's still some challenging spots to be
Yes.
filled. So,
Yes.
thank you, Alicia and Kathy, for an informative and educational conversation. I really appreciate your sharing information about the work of the Newton City Council and School Committee. With nomination papers now available, it's a great time to help those who want to run for office who are supporting candidates. For our audience, please contact the League of Women Voters of Newton with comments or ideas on this show and future topics by emailing info@lwvnewton.org. The specific comments and opinions made during this program do not necessarily represent those of the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, multi-issue grassroots organization that encourages informed and active participation in local, state, and national government. The League develops positions on issues, but does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. Membership in the League is open to all citizens of voting age. You will be able to view all three Don't Just Stand There Run programs by going to New TV or lwvnewton.org. On behalf of the Newton League of Women Voters, I want to thank all members of the New TV crew and who always do an absolutely fantastic job. Thank you.